Huh? BD? Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting of the Lancaster City Council. It is 6:01 p.m. Mr. Ailes?
Pardon me? I'm sorry, I was listening to, he was disrupting the meeting.
I don't believe that is true, Mr. Ailes.
I'll entertain a motion for an executive session.
I thought we were doing that last.
He's coming.
Just sat down.
Chairman McDaniel, I'd like to make a motion, the Finance Committee convene an executive session to consider preparing for, conducting, and reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation and other terms and conditions of their employment pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Section 121.22 G4. The executive session should include the following: Council President Ohl, all council members, the mayor, the auditor, the treasurer, the law director, the service safety director, deputy service safety director, and HR director.
I will second that motion. Mr. Ailes?
All in favor? Aye.
I'm a yes. We are in executive session.
Chairman McDaniel, I move to leave executive session and reconvene the regular meeting of Lancaster City Council Finance Committee.
I will second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Have returned to the regular agenda of the Finance Committee meeting. The first item on our agenda is Resolution 13323, a resolution authorizing the City of Lancaster's, or let me rephrase that again. A resolution authorizing the City of Lancaster's responsibility for the CHIP program grant with funding from the Ohio Department of Development coming out of Economic Development. Mr. Ailes.
Yes, did I see Linda come in? Linda?
Good evening. This is for a grant that we have been awarded. You've already passed a resolution to apply for these funds. The state of Ohio's Department of Development needed specific language around the mayor, authorizing the mayor to implement this grant. So we just put the whole thing back in the legislation for your approval.
Any questions on this particular piece?
We need to suspend, obviously, so, okay.
Suspension, and I'm the second on that.
Yes.
All right, thank you. The next item on our agenda is Resolution 13423, a resolution authorizing the Lancaster auditor to request an advance of funds from Fairfield County and the city's apportionment of tax settlements for 2024. Auditor Nettles, you want to discuss that?
Yes, this is an annual piece that I usually bring forward during the first meeting of every year, which allows me to request cash advances on our real estate tax settlements throughout the year. I was just trying to get a jump on and go multiple readings, because usually the county auditor now is liking this by the middle of January, so they can get all of their affairs in order, because as we all know, we get our real estate tax bills come in January or whatever. When they come in, seem to be earlier and earlier. So I want to be able to get them notification early, so they're locked in, so we don't miss their deadline to get those cash advances.
Questions for the auditor? And 2 readings is fine on this?
Yes.
So 2 readings, it's coming out of finance. Larry, will you be the second on that?
Yes.
Next item on our agenda is Resolution 13523, a resolution to amend the Community Development Department's 2023 expense budget, amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor to declare an emergency. Auditor Nettles, you want to discuss this one?
Yes.
Okay.
I went through on Friday, and I know Linda and I discussed this, that she had projects that, fingers crossed or hopeful doing and she's at the mercy of these vendors to get her the information. And unfortunately, I'm kind of at the mercy of state auditors that when you're dealing with HUD, they have the cash there. We don't have the cash here. So kind of like my cleanup piece that I did, I have to bring budgets in line with cash. So since this is the last meeting this year, and not knowing where that was transpiring, whether those would come in or not, so I've needed to kind of lower those budgets to bring them in. Doesn't mean she can't still pull the cash. She can do that, but it's just, then she would just have to wait or tell them that until the beginning of January to pay those, if they would draw those down or tell her for invoices. So this is something that I needed to do to bring in line, since this is the last council meeting of the year, with the unknown. Now she'll probably has got the invoices to draw, but the unknown, I just needed to bring these in line, which the unfortunate, when you do this, you're gonna have to close out purchase orders. So on a caveat, we'll be bringing together a legislation piece on first reading next meeting for then and nows for all these projects. But this one is, I need to bring the expense budget so we don't get a citation from state audit.
Right. Linda, did you have anything to add?
Well said.
Questions for the auditor or Linda? So this is the same thing we did on our budget cleanup bill. This is just this particular account.
Yes.
So we will suspend tonight. Mrs. Kreitz will be the second on that one.
Oh, I do have a question. Is this the
Oh, I'm
lead
sorry.
one? Is this the lead one that we
This
did
is
earlier?
I think Lead and Healthy Homes, you had some that were going to draw for them, but they did not, they may still, but I'm kind of not knowing, and this is since the last meeting, I've kind of got to make a decision, so I've kind of cut the budget off for her, sorry. I just made that, judgment or executive call to cut that off for her, so her and I were going to work together to make sure that those funds and the stuff can get paid out.
Okay.
Any additional questions? We'll suspend on that. Again, Mrs. Kreitz will be the second. We have a, next item on our, that will be on our agenda now that was not there. It's a walk-in piece. It's Resolution 13623, a resolution to approve the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Lancaster and Fraternal Order of Police Communications Technicians with respect to compensation and other matters relating to working conditions. This is the item we just discussed. This is a 3-year agreement between the city and the Comtech union for the PD, our 911 dispatchers. Anybody have any questions on that? So we're going to ask for suspension. And Mr. Ailes, will you second that?
Yes.
The second walk-in item that came in this evening, and the reason these items came in today at the last moment wasn't because the city didn't know they were coming. We were waiting on the union to actually sign the agreement. So it can't come before the legislative body until both sides sign off on it, and that happened. The finalization was today. So the second resolution here is a resolution to approve, it's 13723, my apologies. A resolution to approve the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Lancaster and the Fraternal Order of Police Officers with respect to compensation and other matters relating to working conditions. Again, it's a 3-year contract in effect until at the end. I'm not sure their exact dates. I think it's looks like October 31st, 2026 is the last date of that contract. And this is the information that we discussed in executive session. Does anyone have additional questions, concerns, comments about the collective bargaining agreements that we discussed? We will also ask for suspension on this, and Mrs. Kreitz will be the second on that one. The next item on our agenda is Ordinance 4323, an ordinance to repeal and replace Permanent Ordinance 2523 on November 13th, 2023, to establish compensation for the auditor for the term commencing payroll 1 of 2024 and declare an emergency. This is what we discussed in our meeting on last Monday, the 4th, regarding adjustments to this pay ordinance. And the reason that I felt that it was necessary to revisit this particular ordinance or this particular salary was because of information that has resulted from the collective bargaining agreements and the raises that were passed or approved for other city employees. It seemed appropriate to bring this legislation and have it in front of you tonight for consideration. So this is something that if Ordinance 4323 passes, I would ask for suspension and passage tonight. The reason for that is the only action that we can take on this particular ordinance has to occur before the new term of the elected official takes place. So that is why I'm asking for suspension and requesting passage of this particular piece. Any questions on that? I think we discussed it in pretty good detail, but I welcome your questions. Anyone? All right, thank you. And Mrs. Kreitz is the second on that. So,
Mr. Ailes.
Mr. Ailes, is that what you have?
Yes.
Let me fix that. Thank you. The next item, or the next thing on our agenda is departmental updates. Are there any departmental updates? Chief Snyder?
I just have one, and I'll be brief. I know there's a lot on the agenda tonight. In 2020, the taxpayers passed a levy for safety forces for the police department that included the start of a directed patrol unit and staffing. At the end of 23 here, I'm happy to report we were nearly 75 officers sworn, maybe a couple away from that. And I fully anticipate being at 75 by right around the first of the year, probably a few weeks into the first of the year. So we'll be full staffed. The directed patrol unit started in September with a full staffing of 4 officers. To give a little bit of background of that, it's 4 officers set aside from the patrol division that don't answer calls for service. They proactively investigate and attack quality of life issues in the city of Lancaster. And I have some, I know city council and definitely the city is more interested in results rather than just a bunch of fanfare about what a unit can do. So I have some results for you that hopefully will explain the existence of that unit, which also includes our 2 canine officers. From September until present, they conducted 111 traffic stops. To give that perspective, that's 20% of the patrol division's load in traffic stops alone. And those aren't for chintzy violations, those are for accident-causing violations and quality of life issues, a lot of which many of you have mentioned to me personally that are going on in your wards. Beyond that, they issued 49 citations, 20 narcotics investigations. Canine deployments reached around 112. 12 of those involved searches for people and 91 deployments with 55 indications. What that all means is they found over 290 grams of methamphetamine, 6.5 grams of fentanyl, which nearly a thousandth of the gram can kill you. So 6.5 grams of fentanyl and assorted coke and crack cocaine, 16 felony arrests in 3 months for this 4-man unit. So very happy with the results. We certainly are going to aim to improve those results as well. We don't want to get complacent, but I definitely think the results speak for themselves when it goes to the directed patrol unit and what the citizens of Lancaster have asked that unit to do. If anyone ever has questions about that or wants to know what all that entails or any questions in general, always feel free to email me or call me. I'll be more than happy to talk about that and brag about those guys. So,
Questions for the chief?
thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any other departmental updates? Seeing none, I will turn it over to President Uhl for tonight's meeting prep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are a few other things to address. Temporary ordinance 49-23, Council Administrative Services Committee through law, Mrs. Kreitz. I don't see Mrs. Kreitz. Mr. Schoonover, are you able to? She's out in the audience.
Yeah.
Oh, is she coming up here?
Well, Miss
Well, sure.
Stephanie was gonna,
Stephanie doing this?
she's smiling at me.
I
Law
am
Director
smiling.
Hall.
Council Administrative Services Committee. I just had to remind myself. I apologize. So currently, City Council has codified that there are 9 standing committees in the rules of council in the Lancaster Codified Ordinances. It is my understanding moving forward that the president and president pro tem would like to keep 9 council committees, but they would like to add some responsibilities to the IT, Telecom, and GIS committee that would include HR responsibilities, so human resources specifically. And so the name of that committee had to change to make it administrative services because of what they're actually providing. It will no longer be IT, Telecom, and GIS. It will be known as administrative services, and that's just the reason for that change in your rules prior to the beginning of the first term or the coming term, new term. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to clarify something. So I don't have it on me. I'm so sorry. Oh, thank you. If it said something on here, I thought it said on here, Law Committee proposes changing the name of standing committees, but I don't remember discussing that in any of our Law Committee meetings, proposes changing the name.
It wasn't done in a committee meeting. I spoke with Councilman Schoonover specifically, who asked me to make that change, and I was under the impression that it was supported by the members of the Law Committee meeting.
It was just mentioned to me in passing. I had no idea. So I just want that to be clarified that I
I
did
found
not.
out in the packet.
Huh?
I found out when we received the packets.
Okay, well, I apologize. I could have sent out an email. I apologize. I assumed it was just a rule of council that needed to be changed based on what the new president and president pro tem would like.
Okay.
Not
I just
mine.
wondered, because when I read that, and I
Not
was
mine.
like, I work night shift, and we always have a meeting the next day. I'm thinking, man, I don't remember that.
No, changes to the
So-
codified ordinance have to come through the law committee, essentially.
Yeah, I know that, but I just
Yeah,
don't remember
so
discussing.
that's why
Okay.
it's sponsored by law committee.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hall. Any questions or further discussion about this? If not, Mrs. Kreitz, you're the sponsor,
Yes, sir.
and Mr. Schoonover will second. Okay, and we're suspending tonight on temporary ordinance 49-23. Temporary ordinance 50-23, council pro tem and clerk appointment, council organization meeting date coming through law once again. Ms. Kreitz, or to Law Director Hall.
Law Director Hall, do you want to go over this one, please?
Love to. So, again, the incoming council president and council pro tem have, I think, established that availability for the first organizational meeting in January is not going to fit within the current rules of council. The current rules of council require that you meet by January 5th. So we're just changing to allow for some scheduling conflicts, that meeting to occur in the first week of January in the new term.
Thank you very much. Discussion on this? Okay, if not, then this will come through law with Mrs. Kreis. Ms. Teener, will you second? And we're looking again for suspension this evening. Temporary ordinance 51-23, an ordinance to repeal 113.01 for LCO council clerk public notice reimbursement coming through law. Mrs. Kreis?
Yes, Law Director Hall.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So as we were looking at, as the clerk and I were looking at the cleanups that we're doing in the rules of council, we addressed the chapter in section 113.01 because there will be a new clerk of council beginning January 1 in your new term or in the new term that some of you will be here for. And the Lancaster Codified Ordinance right now requires us to pay that person $1.22 per public notice that they post, as well as $1.22 for the certified mail that they send out. That obviously doesn't even cover the amount. That section was, I believe, from the 70s. And the clerk advised that that's not what is done in practice. City Council actually covers the cost of its own mailings and postings. So we just thought it would probably be best to clean that up while we were in that section.
Look at all this money you could have been making.
I'm not in it for
Can we
the
do a
money.
reimbursement?
All right, questions or comments on this? Okay, then again, coming through law, Mrs. Kreis, the sponsor, and Mr. Schoonover, the second.
Yes.
And we will move towards suspension this evening. Okay, I don't see anything else for tonight's meeting prep under my section. I'll return back to the chairman.
So we're going to move to other items for finance, and I have one thing I wanted to discuss. We are addressing third reading on ordinances 31 through 37-23. These are your pay ordinances for your non-union, management, and professional personnel, parks and rec employees, public transit, clerk of courts, IT administrator, municipal court management professional, municipal court judicial and probation personnel, and finally, the summer intern program. So I just want to remind everyone that during the budgeting process, the administration made pay recommendations for each of these positions. They are incorporated in the budget, and they're incorporated in the pay scales that are attached to each one of the ordinances. So that's what we'll be voting on tonight. So there is change, obviously, from our first version of this to our replacement version, which I will introduce tonight. Does anybody have any questions on that? I just wanted to throw that out there to remind everybody that they are definitely adjusted based on the budgeting process that we've been working through. So are any other items for finance? Any other items for the finance committee? Seeing none, Mrs. Kreitz, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make that motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. 6:40 p.m.
The regular meeting of Lancaster City Council will begin at 6:45. Like that.
the Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. Feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our two locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.
Hi, I'm Brandon Cox from Toys for Kids. Our mission at Toys for Kids is to collect new, unwrapped toys and distribute those toys to less fortunate children in our community. So we're really excited to be chosen this month by the Buckeye Cares program. That means Buckeye will make a generous donation to Toys for Kids with every vehicle sold this month. Hometown community support is vital for helping our local kids in need. Thank you, Buckeye, for supporting our kids.
Welcome to Lancaster City Council. Please join me in a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for the opportunity to serve once again. May you be with us, guide our hearts and minds as we go about the work set before us, and may we continue to give you glory and honor for what you're doing in our lives. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. I hereby call this meeting of Lancaster City Council to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Here.
Mr. Ailes?
Here.
Mrs. Kreitz? Here. Mr. James?
Here.
Mr. Matlin?
Here.
Mr. McDaniel?
Here.
Mr. Porter?
Here.
Mr. Schoonover?
Here.
And Mrs. Teener?
Here.
Let the record reflect that all 9 members of Lancaster City Council are in attendance this evening, reading and disposing of the journal.
I'd like to present the regular meeting minutes dated November 27th, 2023.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the journal.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the journal. Discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Reports of city officials.
Series of emails regarding the finance agenda for December 4th, 2023 meeting submitted by Mr. McDaniel. Email dated December 1st, 2023 regarding finance agenda for December 4th, 2023 meeting submitted by Law Director Stephanie Hall. Email dated December the 11th, 2023 regarding Lancaster proposed zoning change. Letter against zoning from 84 lumber representatives submitted by Service Safety Director Paul Martin. And finally, an email dated December 11th, 2023 regarding finance agenda submitted by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of city officials.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of city officials. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there communications?
There are 3. Email dated December 5th regarding the union seeks support to keep Lancaster cereal facility open, submitted by Heather Hildebrand, field organizer for Ohio and Indiana and Kentucky. Notice the legislative authority of a new liquor license to Lancaster Host LLC, doing business as Holiday Inn Express and Suites, Lancaster, located at 1861 Riverway Drive, Lancaster, Ohio, submitted by the Ohio Division of Liquor Control. And finally, a notice to the legislative authority of a new liquor license to Patel Amara Petro LLC, located at 521 Lincoln Avenue, Lancaster, Ohio, submitted by the Ohio Division of Liquor Control.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the communications.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file communications. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We do have several special presentations and awards this evening.
Right underneath it.
There's a box.
We have a number of members of the administration and of Lancaster City Council who are leaving us. This is their last meeting, so while our terms don't expire till the end of the year, this is the final meeting of the year for Lancaster City Council. First up, we're going to recognize a few members of the administration. And first, we would like to present to Mayor David Scheffler a plaque for his years of service, March 31st, 2017 to December 31st, 2023. Sir, if you want to scooter on up here, I can scoot to you. I'll scoot to you, and let us say thank you for your service to the city of Lancaster and its citizens. Also tonight, we want to present a member of the administration who has served for many, many years. March 31st, 1997. I was a junior in high school until November 17, 2023 as superintendent of the sanitation department, and as service safety director November 18, 2013, clear through to December 31st, 2023. In honor of your many years of service, we present this to you, Paul Martin.
Just love being here at the city. I'm not leaving, and but I will just support you in so many ways. This is a great community, and we are at good times. I've been in this many positions when we've had tough times. Tough decisions have to be made, but it's great to see so many businesses and, the needs of our city improve. I am so grateful that taxpayers passed our income tax levy, because it's always been a struggle for me to see police and fire struggling, and so I'm just grateful for the citizens and the support, and look forward to the continued leadership of this city. I feel very confident of what's coming down the road, even though Dave Scheffler and I are moving on. We're retiring, not to return. But thank you so much. It's been great working with you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your years of service. Now we want to recognize 5th Ward Representative Christina Kreitz for her service April 9th, 2021 through December 31st of 2023. If you would please come up here and receive your plaque in honor of your years of service on City Council and to the citizens of the city of Lancaster.
Thank you. It's been both a rewarding and enjoyable experience and privilege to serve the city of Lancaster and the residents who elected me, and I look forward to serving in other capacities in the future. Thank you.
All right, now we have, is this right? This isn't quite right. I'm gonna have to work on this one. Look at that and you tell me if that's right. All right, here for 3rd Ward Representative, January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2023. For your years of service, Jack Matlin, we want to recognize you and say thank you for serving the citizens of Lancaster.
It's been interesting, if you don't know. This gets me to 32 years with the city, because I did my time in the fire department, and it's really been neat learning the other side of where the money comes from and how it's organized. I've really learned a lot, and I'd encourage the new people that have gotten elected to spend a lot of time going to the meetings and learn how this all works, because it's a lot more complicated than you think, and you need to figure out the ways to do it. And I've had a good time doing it, so I'm not going anywhere. I'll still be around.
All right, serving as 2nd Ward Representative from January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2023, a plaque presented in honor of your service to Mr. Tom James. Tom, thank you for your service to the city of Lancaster.
I'm a person of very few words. I've only got 6 pages here, so be prepared. A little over 4 years ago, I ran for election of the 2nd Ward for the wrong reason. I thought, well, that will check off my bucket list for public service, but then it turned into something much, much more. It takes a whole lot more to run a city our size than you ever could imagine. I have had the privilege and the honor to be associated and learn and work with a whole lot of incredible people. I won't name all of you because it'd take a little too long, but I am much more and thrilled to have had that opportunity to serve not only this city, but serve on this same council. And a big part of this, and became my passion, was the one committee that nobody really wants to be on. That's the one that has to deal with water treatment, wastewater treatment, stormwater, and environmental engineering. And I was more than lucky to be able to do that. That is one of the busiest committees we have. And it gave me a new appreciation for all of the very competent people we have in some major administrative functions. And it gave me an opportunity also, because my background kind of fit for that, to help. In the time that I've been here, in the 4 years, I've sponsored and passed over 200 pieces of legislation, and almost all of them are tied to a lot of dollars. And it's one of those things that the magnitude of it just doesn't become apparent until you actually get involved in it. And almost all of those 200 pieces of legislation were unanimously passed because we always did our homework. And once again, it's because we have such amazing people in some of those superintendent positions. And I would hope that in my tenure here, I've made some small contribution to the massive amount of infrastructure that we now have on tap and will come online soon. And I just hope they invite me for the ribbon cutting of the new water treatment plant when it's ready to roll.
All right, next up, serving from January 1st, 2005 through December 31st, 2023, 18 years of outstanding service to Lancaster City Council and to the citizens of Lancaster. Would you please help me in recognizing Teresa Sandy?
I must say I had to make up these plaques, so I put the outstanding in there for myself. I would like to thank the late Carl Tapman. He appointed me in 2005. I thank him for having faith in me to do this position. I served under Ken Culver, Kathy Bittler, and finally David Uhl. I was going to retire just from city council. David asked me 2 years ago to stay the last term with him, so I decided I would stay. And now I'm going to retire from my day job from the law director's office to take care of my mom. I want to thank you for a very rewarding career, and I have met lots of people, and I'm very nervous, so I'm going to go sit back down. Thank you very much.
Teresa, thank you. Thanks for hanging on with us, especially through my 2-year last term here. And, for those who don't know, Jack was mentioning there's just a lot that goes on. It's very complicated. Sometimes it's, difficult to keep track of things. But Teresa has done an unbelievable job over the last 18 years of keeping us moving forward and heading in the right direction. So thank you for all you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, today, we want to recognize for his service January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2023, presented to him for not finishing now, but completing his term on the legislative authority and moving on to the executive branch. Let's show our appreciation to at-large Councilman Don McDaniel, next mayor of Lancaster.
It has been an absolute pleasure to serve with council. I've learned so much. We've done a lot of work. I believe the city's in a better position now than it was when we started. It's been a great experience. Now I get to work with the other side and work with council again and for the citizens of Lancaster. It has been an absolute, I can't say it enough. Tom, it's been a joy. Council's losing some very experienced and dedicated public servants that were on council. We've got new blood coming in. They're sitting out here listening to this right now. I'm sure they're going to step up and do the same thing. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to do. Looking forward to working with all of you, and I'm excited about the future. Thank you.
All right, we are then ready to
Wait,
move
whoa,
on. We're ready to move on. We don't have time. We're just
President
going to
Uhl,
forge ahead.
if you would start moving back this direction, I'm going to do this from sitting down, and I'm not going to let you off easy. You all just thought he was a pretty and humorous face sitting up there leading these council meetings, but there's a lot more to it, and as I calculate quickly here, he was present at over 100 early morning breakfasts that preceded these meetings to learn about what was on the agenda, what's going on in the city. I don't believe, Paul, he ever offered to buy one time, but maybe that's coming. But David Uhl served as an at-large rep during 2016 and 2017, but was also president of City Council from January 1st, 18 through 20 more days. So we really appreciate his leadership, his counsel, and all that he's done to make these meetings a little more enjoyable than just dry meetings. So congratulations and thank you, President Ohl.
Thank you. Well, I wondered if I was going to get emotional. Nope. And but I will say this, it has been my honor. What a privilege it has been to serve. I can't say that I'm finished. Of course, my day job keeps me in public service, but I love the city of Lancaster. I'm so appreciative to so many around the table who have been supportive, especially Mayor Scheffler. Many may not know, and he may not want the claim to fame, but he hired me downtown, more than a decade ago, 13, 14 years ago, when I was the executive director of Destination Downtown. And we have maintained a close friendship, and he has been a great mentor for me, so I appreciate you and all you've done. Thank you for your kind words, and thanks to each of you, to everyone who has served in the past with me, and to each one who's serving today, and for those who will come, I wish you nothing but the best as you continue to serve the city. Thank you. All right, we done with that now? All done? All right, let's move ahead. Are there any petitions or memorials?
There are none to be presented.
At this time, we allow the voters and taxpayers of the city of Lancaster to address us on any item or issue they would like. If you would like to address City Council, please come forward, sign in on the green clipboard, and then you will have an opportunity to address City Council. Please note a couple of things. First, per the rules of council, you have 5 minutes to make your comments. After that, we'll ask you to please retake your seat. Secondly, while members of council may choose to respond to you at a later time during the meeting, they will not respond to your questions or comments at this time. With that in mind, I see Mr. Lovell has already taken his place at the podium, so thank you for being here, and please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council. I'm Bob Lovell, 243 East Fifth Avenue. I'm also proudly a member of the city's Board of Park Commissioners. As that, on behalf of that board, and on behalf of the staff of our city parks, and on behalf of all the people of Lancaster, I want to thank you for your generous contribution to the pedestrian bridge at Martins Park. As you're probably aware, recently the parks did a survey, an active survey. We went out and questioned the Lancaster public of what they want more of in their parks. We included children in that survey. And with that, we have a big wish list that we're hoping to fill. You combine that with the upcoming rebuilding of Miller Park, we've got a big obligation. So whereas a bridge is absolutely necessary for recreation and connectivity, it's not a sexy thing, it's not a fun thing, but it is necessary. And what your contribution does is frees up a lot of money for the fun stuff that the people of Lancaster like. So I thank you. I get to thank all of you because I believe it was unanimous, and wish you the best holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lovell. We appreciate it. Thank you. All right, is there anyone else who would like to address Lancaster City Council? I'll note at this time we do have 2 public hearings this evening. This is not the time to address City Council on those items or issues. That will come in a few moments. But if there's any general item or issue anyone else would like to address, now is the time. Okay, well, thank you all for being here this evening. Reports of standing committees.
Public Works Committee meeting minutes dated October 13th, 2023, submitted by Mr. Schoonover. Code Enforcement and Zoning Committee meeting minutes dated November 1st, 2023, submitted by Mr. Ehlers. And finally, the Finance Committee meeting minutes dated December 4th, 2023, submitted by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of standing committees.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of standing committees. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. The reports of special committees.
There are none to be presented.
As I noted a few moments ago, we do have 2 public hearings this evening on temporary ordinance 4223 and temporary ordinance 4623 respectively. We will begin with temporary ordinance 4223, and let me just outline quickly how this will work. In a moment, I'll ask the clerk to read the preamble of the legislation. After she does that, I'll turn it over to the sponsor for any comments that they may have. Once the sponsor has finished making comments, we will open it up to those who would like to speak at the public hearing. Again, beginning with 42-23, we'll ask that you come to the podium, sign in on the silver clipboard, and then begin your comments. I will call for proponents or those who are in favor of this ordinance and legislation to come forward first. After the proponents have had an opportunity, we will call the opponents, those who are against the legislation, to come forward and make comment. After that, we will enter into a time of rebuttal, where proponents have an opportunity to come back once again, make any final comments that they would like, and then we will move on finally to opponents one final time to allow them any rebuttal they would like. Please note this important process. You must have spoken the first time as a proponent or opponent to be able to speak the second time in rebuttal. With that, we're going to move forward and ask that the clerk read the preamble for temporary ordinance 42-23.
An ordinance to amend the zoning map subject to passage of the annexation of 8.9 plus minus acres in Greenfield Township and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. Ailes.
Yes, as I've learned, this is another step in the process of annexing any piece of property to the city. We have to change the zoning to match what the people want to do there. So with that, it's that simple. We've discussed the project, we've discussed, we all know where it's at, we've seen the map, we know what they want to do, so that's it.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Ailes. With that, we will open it up. Temporary ordinance 42-23 to proponents, those who are in favor of this legislation. Yes, ma'am. If you'll please just state your name and address for the record, and then you can begin your comments.
Yes. Hi, my name is Elizabeth Seedorf. I am an attorney at Voorhees, Sater, Seymour, and Pease in Columbus. That's 52 East Gay Street, Columbus, Ohio. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. So this property is, as was kind of discussed, it's 3 tax parcels. One of them is being annexed to the city of Lancaster currently, and then 2 are existing in the city of Lancaster. And as part of the development, this is what we need to do. We need to rezone the property to the existing properties from the S1 or SI Service Industrial to RM Residential Multi-Unit, and then the property that's being annexed from Greenfield Township will need to be the same zoning as well, which is the RM Residential Multi-Unit. This property is currently vacant. And then this is just an ideal transition between the surrounding properties, which are residential to the north and then some commercial and industrial on either side. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. And thank you for pointing out that one different process as well that I did not mention during the instructions, which is witnesses are subject to questioning by city council. And so before you leave, after you make your comments, please hang around to see if anyone does have questions. With that, does anyone have questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for being here. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor of this legislation? Proponents? Seeing none, then we'll move to opponent testimony. Is there anyone who would like to speak against or in opposition of this legislation? Okay, seeing no opponents, then we'll move back to proponents. Ma'am, would you like to say anything else? Okay, thank you again for being here. No opponent testimony was given, so there's no opportunity for rebuttal. I see the law director moving her microphone down, which means I've done something wrong.
No, absolutely not. I just wanted to clarify a point that was not made earlier. So you are having a hearing tonight, a public hearing on this, because that is required, but Planning Commission has not met and changed the zoning yet. We're doing it this way, which is not how we normally do it, because you only have one meeting in December. So Planning Commission will meet on the 14th, and if any opponents or proponents would like to appear at that hearing and testify as well, they have the opportunity to do that. Just wanted to make that clear.
Very good. Yes, thank you. That is backwards from the normal way. Okay. All right, with that then, we will consider this public hearing closed if the sponsor has no further comments.
None.
All right, then we will close public hearing for temporary ordinance 42-23. We will now begin the public hearing for temporary ordinance 46-23. All of the same rules apply. And so then, I see two gentlemen nodding at each other, deciding who's going to go first or second maybe. And so we will open it up to proponents. If there's anyone who would like to speak in favor of 46-23, right after the clerk reads the preamble.
Sorry. An ordinance to amend the zoning map subject to passage of the annex. That's not right. Bear with me, please. Or after I said outstanding, I do this.
It's already on the plaque now, can't take it back.
Oh, it is the same thing, I'm sorry. 46, okay. An annexation to amend the zoning map subject to passage of the annexation of Metro Developments 8.9 plus minus acres in Greenfield Township and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. Ailes, any comments?
I would defer to the law director. Thank you.
I bet she's really excited about that. Law
Yeah, I
Director
can
Hall,
tell.
would you have any comments?
No, just the same point of clarification that I just made earlier. Basically, just amending the zoning map. And it's an opportunity for the public to comment on that as well.
Thank you very much. All right. With that, we will now open up to proponent testimony. Those in favor of temporary ordinance 46-23. Is there anyone who'd like to speak? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Elizabeth Seedorf, 52 East Gay Street. I believe the reason there are two of them is because two parcels are in the city of Lancaster and then one is in Greenfield Township, so that's the reason for both. So my comments stand from the previous time I was up here to now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What's that? Any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Other proponents, those in favor of this legislation? Okay, seeing none then, we will open it up to opponent testimony, those who are against or oppose this piece of legislation. Are there any opponents tonight who would like to speak? Okay, seeing no opponents then, we will move back to you one more time, ma'am, for proponent. She says she's good to go. No opponents had testified, and so we will move on then to closing comments from the sponsor.
I have none.
No closing comments. All right, with that, if the law director doesn't have any other comments for this one, we will consider the hearing for temporary ordinance 46-23 closed. All right, we'll now move to the reading of resolutions, beginning with temporary resolution 114-23.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance, increase receipts, and to amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor and the city income tax fund 2016. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 114-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 114-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. Income tax collections were strong this year. As a result, we have an additional split of $5 million for the year end, and this will be moved into the appropriate accounts.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 114-23 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 115-23.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate with the county auditor in the city income tax fund 2016 to cover income tax refund request. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion, council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 115-23.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 115-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, as a result of increased tax collections, there's also increased refund request. Tax Commissioner is asking for $75,000 for that account to make sure that we can refund the appropriate funding to whoever requested.
Thank you very much for the discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 115-23 passes 9-0. Temporary Resolution 117-23.
A resolution to increase and decrease appropriations in the Lancaster Public Transit Program Fund 2021 for additional unexpected cost in Lancaster Fairfield Public Transit as a result of the addition of a fifth loop. I did that last time, I'm sorry. Offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mr. James.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 11723.
I will second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 117-23. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
I don't have any.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 117-23 passes 9-0. Temporary Resolution 122-23.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a contract with Fernandez for engineering services, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President. At this time, I'd like to make a motion to council pass and gross and enter upon a written record temporary resolution numbered 122-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 122-23. Discussion, Mr. James.
Given that this is the last resolution that I will have the opportunity to pass, I'm proud to say that it went 3 readings because I became the poster child for suspension over the last 4 years. And this particular contract is for $150,000 with Verdantis, and they actually provide a lot of inspection services for us throughout of all the projects that we have in the city.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. James. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 122-23 passes 9-0. Temporary Resolution 123-23.
A resolution to make appropriations for the current 2024 budget expenses and other expenditures of the City of Lancaster, State of Ohio, for the fiscal year 2024, and to establish line item transfer authorities for departments, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 123-23.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. Before there's a second on that, I believe we need a motion to replace.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Get ahead of myself.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council replace resolution temporarily numbered 123-23 with temporary ordinance resolution 123. Are we at 1 star or 2 stars? 123-23 star, as given in the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting.
We have a motion and a second to replace temporary resolution 123-23 with resolution 123-23 star as given to clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing at this time.
Discussion on the motion to amend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to amend and replace passes 9-0. We now have before us temporary resolution 123-23 star. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, we'll try this again. Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record resolution temporary numbered 123-23 star.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 123-23 star. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. As council knows, this is a several-week process. We've had, this is our third reading in council, and we had an additional budget meeting at a special finance committee meeting last Monday, where we brought in all the department heads, the administration, and questions were asked and answered. We also had emailed questions and phone calls and follow-up and a significant amount of documentation and replies from various department heads, from our SSD and our deputy SSD, the mayor and others. It's a long, tedious process. You know, I'm confident that this is the budget for 2024, and I would be voting yes on this.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion? Yes, Ms. Teener.
I think for the most part, it's good. The reason why I'm voting no is I think our next administration needs to look more at some of these departments. I had asked back in October, in public again, from the Parks Department, please give us the stuff about Olive Dale. Still haven't gotten any of it. How much money's going to them from the parks tax dollars? How much money those people are holding on to? How much, I mean, even in the, ordinance here we have that we'll be voting on, are they paying for any of these employees that's taking care of them? And I think that's something that we need to know. Can't get any answer. Bob and Carrie are out there. Carrie's been on the board. Can't get any answers from anybody about any dollar amounts at all. And that kind of bothers me. And then, of course, there's another department I think we need to have more oversight over also. So I'll be voting no, because I think we have a new administration that will be looking into things.
Thank you, Ms. Teener. Further discussion on the motion to pass? Yes, Mr. Ehlers.
I have a question for Superintendent Drum about, this kind of goes hand in hand with Ordinance 3123 regarding a position, and the funding for it. In this year you came forward asking for a compliance manager, telling us that you would not need a construction supervisor. And then I saw in our ordinance, which again, it goes with the budget because it's now funded, is that you are now asking for a construction supervisor. And so I was just wondering if you had an explanation for why we were told there was no need for one and now we are having one. And I apologize, I didn't reach out. I didn't really catch it until this morning.
Yeah, please come up to the podium.
Really wasn't prepared for this, but we've always needed a construction supervisor. When the compliance manager came up, the only way we could get this to pass if we could revoke the construction supervisor, which I did, but we put it back on the books for this year. The reason we never filled it in the past, our revenue did not support it. And if revenue supports it this year, it's a position we really need. We've got Indians kind of supervising Indians, and we really need oversight over part of this department. For one manager, try to oversee the whole distribution. It's way too hard for him.
Thank you, sir. Okay, further questions? All right, thank you very much. All right, last call before we move to vote. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
No.
Temporary Resolution 123-23 star passes 8-1. We now have before us second reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with Temporary Resolution 124-23.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the construction of pickleball courts at Olivedale Park for the Lancaster Parks and Recreation Department and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. Porter and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. Porter.
Thank you, President Newell. At this time, I would make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 124-23.
Second.
Excuse me, resolution. Sorry. Thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second to suspend the third reading of Temporary Resolution 124-23. Discussion, Mr. Porter?
I'll save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
No.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
No.
The motion to suspend passes 7-2. Mr. Porter.
Yes. At this time, I would make a motion to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution temporarily numbered 12423.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross enter upon the written record temporary resolution 124-23. Discussion, Mr. Porter.
Yes, we've volleyed the pickleball court issue back and forth numerous times this year. We've tried to let it out for contract once, wasn't successful. We've also tried to go through a cooperative purchasing with the state, was not able to do that. We just need to do this, and that's why this is here tonight, and we need to get the ball rolling. So, thank you.
Or bouncing, as Mr. Matlin has suggested, yes. All right, any questions? Yes, Mr. Ailes.
I agree that we need to do this. I want to say that first, but the second thing I'd like to say, I'm glad Bob's still in the room. Somewhere in your planning, Bowers Park needs to float to the top of your priority list. I was disappointed. I went to your budget meeting, and I was disappointed to see that it wasn't anywhere near the top. It was in the, I don't remember how it was phrased, but it's not going to get done next year is basically what they were saying. We're not the park board. We don't make that decision, but we do make the decision on how the money is spent. And I would like to remind the park board of that relationship, that we do have the final authority. And I would really encourage them to find a way to make Bowers Park a priority in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Ms. Diener.
I really appreciate what you said about Bowers Park, and I do, and I agree. And what people don't understand is if we're doing the budget, people say we don't have any say on the park. If we're approving something in the budget, we're approving that. So we do have a say with the parks. I do believe we do. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Diener. Mr. McDaniel.
So, yeah, I agree this legislation should proceed, and I'll be voting yes for it. But I think the Bowers Park discussion is, I'm not sure the park board understands how much I've been hearing in the community about the need to replace Miller Park for boys baseball or for baseball and softball in general. I know they did a study, and I appreciate that, and the study is certainly a valuable tool. But the people that play baseball are probably not participating in your study. Maybe some of the parents might be here and there, but the truth is Bowers Park, when we decommissioned Miller and started building a water plant there, I wouldn't call it a promise necessarily, but it was certainly very much implied that Bowers Park would be the replacement for Miller Park. And I'm not sure that the park board knows that was communicated, because it was. And it's a significant issue for a lot of people. And I would like the park board to strongly consider work at Bowers Park.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel.
I have one more comment.
We'll have to go to everyone before we can come back to you, Mr. Ailes. That's okay. Mr. Ehlers.
I have two comments. One, I will be a no on this piece of legislation tonight, because even though I agree that we need to keep moving on pickleball courts, I just don't agree with just continually to raise the price every single time. I think this is the second or third time they've raised the price, so I will be a no on that. But on a follow-up to what Mr. Ailes had said, I had meetings with Superintendent Gayfield about the fact that when we passed our park levy 2 years ago, part of the campaigning to it was that we were going to be able to bond things with this levy. And I've been to several park board meetings, and there's never been a discussion on bonding anything. And on one of the nonprofit boards I serve on, we maintain parks and we maintain baseball fields. We've bonded anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000 to turf 27 fields or more or less. And so I don't see why our park board, they communicated to us that they were going to bond certain larger projects, and they've not kept up to that part of their promise.
Thank you, Mr. Ehlers. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on this for the first time before we head back to Mr. Ailes? Okay, Mr. Ailes.
I apologize for that, but I have one more thing to say. And I've attended a number of park board meetings and patiently listened to their discussions about priorities and money and availability, and I get all that. I understand. At the same meeting, at the budget meeting, a staff member made the comment that they would rather see Bowers Park become a soccer park than baseball diamonds. And that's where I ran into the end of my patience. And I just, we took what I think is an iconic park in Lancaster, Ohio, and I understand why we did it. I get it. That was the perfect place for a water department. And in exchange for that, we got a field. What, has it been 3 years?
Yeah, every bit.
With the promise, as I understand it, of becoming the new baseball park. And I drove out there tonight before I came to the meeting just to see what kind of progress has been made. And I do have to say, I could see some signs. It's a little flatter than it was the last time I was out there, but not much. There's a lot of work to be done. And I would, again, encourage the park board to rearrange their priority list maybe one more time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ailes. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
No.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
No.
Temporary Resolution 124-23 passes 7-2. Temporary Resolution 127-23.
A resolution authorizing the city of Lancaster to apply for funding from the state of Ohio capital improvement budget offered by Mr. Ailes and seconded by Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. Ailes.
Yes, Mr. President, I move that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 127-23.
Second. We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 127-23. Discussion, Mr. Ailes?
I'll save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. Ailes.
Yes, Mr. President, I move that we pass and engross and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 127-23.
Mr. Schoonover.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and engross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 120. Which one are we on? Yeah, 127-23. Discussion, Mr. Ailes.
Yes, we put together this request. They want to spend money at Elmwood Park. They want to create some more pickleball courts. And we've added, I think, the clock tower, which I understand it's been a request before and been denied, so we're persistent. It's a one-time deal from the state of Ohio. We're returning our tax dollars to the community, and I think it's a good thing, so.
All right, further discussion on the motion to pass. We still using a lobbyist for this? Don't we use a lobbyist to try to get this stuff done? Still, and that's still the plan?
Yes.
Thank you. Further discussion. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 127-23 passes 9-0. Temporary Resolution 128-23.
A resolution to increase receipts, appropriate from the unencumbered balance, and amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor in the escrow fund 8060, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 128-23.
Mr. Ailes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 128-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
I'll save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call a roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record, resolution temporarily numbered 12823.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record, temporary resolution 128-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, this is regarding the Lawrence Street Water Pollution Control Improvement Project. Kokosing Industrial had a retainer, an escrow amount of $759,000 plus. We need to set up the appropriate budgets and establish that account so that that can be handled properly.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion before us. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 128-23 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 130-23.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a local public agency federal local LET project agreement with the State of Ohio Department of Transportation for the East 6th Avenue Bridge over Fetters Run Replacement Project, PID 120475, and to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into a design pre-construction services contracts with various consultants, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mr. James.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 130-23.
I will second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 130-23. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
No thanks.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 130-23.
I will second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 130-23. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
This is next, or one of the first steps in many steps to replace the bridge on 6th Avenue at Fetters Run.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 130-23 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 131-23.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a local public authority federal local LET project agreement with the State of Ohio Department of Transportation for the Boving Road Improvement Project, PID 120485, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mr. Porter.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 131-23.
Second.
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 131-23. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
No.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the enter upon the written record temporary resolution 131-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 131-23. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
No thanks.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 131-23 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 132-23.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a pre-annexation agreement with Double Bogey Holdings LLC for parcel number 027-0035930 and 027-0035900, consisting of 45.1 plus minus acres in Pleasant Township, and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. Ailes and seconded by Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. Ailes.
Yes, Mr. President, I move that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 132.23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 132-23. Discussion, Mr. Ailes. Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. Ailes.
Yes, I move that council pass and engross and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 132-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 132-23. Discussion, Mr. Ailes.
First step in annexing another 45 acres into the city of Lancaster. The maps are attached. I have plenty of time to review those, so I hope you would pass it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 132-23 passes 9-0. We now have first reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with temporary resolution 133-23.
A resolution authorizing the City of Lancaster's responsibility for the CHIP program grant with funding from the Ohio Department of Development, offered by Mr. Ailes, and seconded by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Ailes.
Yes, Mr. President, I move that we suspend council's rules and waive the second and third readings of resolution temporarily numbered 133-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 133-23. Discussion, Mr. Ailes.
No.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. Ailes.
Yes, I move that we pass and engross and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 133-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 133-23. Mr. Ailes.
Good news is we received a grant for $250,000. The bad news is we didn't word something specifically the way the state wanted it, so we have to do it again. Sorry.
Excellent. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 133-23 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 134-23.
A resolution authorizing the Lancaster City Auditor to request an advance of funds from Fairfield County for the city's apportionment of tax settlement for 2024, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
First of two readings.
First of two readings on temporary resolution 134-23. Temporary resolution 135-23.
A resolution to amend the Community Development Department's 2023 expense budget, amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor, and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 135-23.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 135-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily number 135-23.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 135-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, this is to bring the Community Development Department's expense budget in line with the cash on hand. It's something that has to be done to comply with state audit requirements.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 135-23 passes 9-0. Are there any further resolutions to come before Lancaster City Council?
Yes, Mr. President.
Oh, yeah, the walk-in stuff. Excellent.
That's right.
Temporary Resolution 136-23.
A resolution to approve a collective bargaining agreement between the City of Lancaster and the Fraternal Order of Police Communication Technicians with respect to compensation and other matters relating to working conditions, offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 13623.
Second. We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 136-23. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. These are walk-in pieces because the final piece of the puzzle to have the collective bargaining agreement finished, both sides had to sign it for us to be able to consider it. So that's why it is a walk-in piece, and that's why I'm requesting suspension, so that these collective bargaining agreements that we have two of them to deal with can be in effect, and the auditor can pay the employees the new negotiated rate going forward. So that's why I'm requesting suspension tonight and consideration of these two, the next two ordinances.
All right,
or
thank you.
resolutions.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily number 13623.
Second. We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 136-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President, I should have mentioned, this is for the City of Lancaster and with the Fraternal Order of Police Communication Technicians, our 911 dispatchers.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 136-23 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 137-23.
A resolution to approve a collective bargaining agreement between the City of Lancaster and the Fraternal Order of Police Patrol Officers with respect to compensation and other matters relating to working conditions, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 13723.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 137-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, for the same reasons as the previous resolution, CBA was signed and agreed upon between the city and the patrol officers, or actually police officers. So also to have this in effect prior to the first of the year, it would need to be passed.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council, pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily number 13723.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 137-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 137-23 passes 9-0. Are there any further resolutions to come before Lancaster City Council? If not, we'll begin the reading of ordinances, beginning with the third reading of temporary ordinance 30-23.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for those employees who are not members of the recognized bargaining units employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2024, and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that to replace ordinance temporarily numbered 3023 by replacing it with ordinance temporarily numbered 3023 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting.
Second.
We have a motion to amend temporary ordinance 30-23 and replace it with ordinance 30-23 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, if you're okay with this, I would like to address the next series of ordinances that all have the same conversation. These, the following ordinances, 30 through 37, are the pay ordinances for the positions as outlined in each ordinance. They have been adjusted to incorporate the budget recommendations by the administration, as well as update some of the benefits, and holiday was added, et cetera, that all is incorporated in this current proposed change. Each one of these ordinances will have the same comments, and probably not necessary to make them over again each time.
Okay, thank you very much. We are now on the motion to replace. Any further discussion? Yes,
I
Ms.
did have a
Tanner?
question, because I honestly can't remember. Tree commission, they were gonna hire somebody. What did we, not an extra person in the tree commission?
No, it's gonna be
For the-
made,
Okay.
it has 2 people full-time, and we're gonna keep that at 2 people at this time.
And I mean for the tree arborist type thing, that's just, we're just gonna keep the
Correct.
two?
Just,
Okay, I
they're
just
both-
wanted to make sure.
We call them foresters, because they're in trees, so.
Tree
But
cutter people.
We have 2 right now, we're gonna maintain just 2.
Okay.
Further discussion then on the motion to replace. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to amend and replace carries 9-0. We now have before us temporary ordinance 30-23 star. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 30-23 star.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 30-23 star. Discussion?
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 30-23 star passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 31-23.
An ordinance to establish titles, an ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for management professional personnel employed by the city of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2024 and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council replace ordinance temporarily numbered 31-23 by replacing it with ordinance temporarily numbered 31-23 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to amend temporary ordinance 31-23 and replace it with temporary ordinance 31-23 stars given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing, it would just echo the previous comments.
Discussion on the motion to amend and replace. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to amend and replace carries 9-0. We now have before us temporary ordinance 31-23 star. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 31-23 star.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 31-23 star. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
No.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
No.
Temporary ordinance 31-23 star passes 7-2. Temporary ordinance 32-23.
An ordinance to establish titles and compensation for parks and recreation personnel employed by the city of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2024 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to replace ordinance temporarily numbered 32-23 by replacing it with ordinance temporarily numbered 32-23 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to amend temporary ordinance 32-23 and replace it with temporary ordinance 32-23 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing additional.
Discussion on the motion to replace. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to amend and replace carries 9-0. We now have before us 32-23 star. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 3223 star.
Second. We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 32-23 star. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel?
Nothing else.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
No.
Temporary ordinance 32-23 star passes 8-1. Temporary ordinance 33-23.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for transit personnel employed by the city of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2024 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to replace ordinance temporarily numbered 3323 by replacing it with ordinance temporarily numbered 3323 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to amend temporary ordinance 33-23 and replace it with temporary ordinance 33-23 stars given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing else.
Discussion on the motion to amend and replace. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to amend and replace carries, and we now have before us temporary ordinance 3323 star. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3323 star.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3323 star. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Abstain.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 33-23 star passes 8-0 with one abstention. Temporary ordinance 34-23.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for the Information Technology Administrator, Office of the Clerk of Court, employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio, commencing the first pay period of 2024 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to replace ordinance temporarily numbered 3423 by replacing it with ordinance temporarily numbered 3423 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to amend temporary ordinance 34-23 and replace it with temporary ordinance 34-23 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to amend and replace. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to amend carries 9-0. We now have temporary ordinance 34-23 before us. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 3423 star.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 34-23 star. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 34-23 star passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 35-23.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for Fairfield County Municipal Court management and professional personnel employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2024 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to replace ordinance temporarily numbered 3523 by replacing it with ordinance temporarily numbered 3523 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to amend temporary ordinance 35-23 and replace it with temporary ordinance 35-23 star. Mr. McDaniel.
No comment.
Discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to amend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 3523 star.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 35-23 star. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel?
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 35-23 star passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 36-23.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for Fairfield County Municipal Court judicial and probation personnel employed by the city of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2024 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to replace ordinance temporarily numbered 3623 by replacing it with ordinance temporarily numbered 3623 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to amend and replace temporary ordinance 36-23 with temporary ordinance 36-23 star. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to replace. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to amend and replace carries 9-0. We have 36-23 star before us. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass and gross and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 3623 star.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 36-23 star. Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 36-23 star passes 9-0. We now have before us temporary ordinance 37-23.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for seasonal interns employed by the city of Lancaster, Ohio, commencing during the summer of 2024 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass and gross and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 3723.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 37-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 37-23 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 40-23.
Excuse me. An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of notes in the maximum principal amount of $475,000 in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of construction and replacement of Miller Park Water Treatment Plant and the acquisition of real property and appurtenances necessary therefore, in the acquisition of construction of installation of raw water distribution piping, approximately 5,300 feet of water lines, new fire hydrants and appurtenances along Wiley Road and Magna Avenue between certain termini, each including design and engineering work, altogether all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass and gross and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 40-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 40-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. This is current bonds are set to mature and will be retired. Additional bonds in the maximum of $475,000 are necessary to pay for the costs associated with the Miller Park Water Treatment Plant.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 40-23 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 42-23.
An ordinance to amend the zoning map subject to passage of the annexation of 8.9 plus minus acres in Greenfield Township and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. Ailes and seconded by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Ailes.
Yes, I move the council pass and engross and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 42-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 42-23. Mr. Ailes.
Nothing?
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
No.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 42-23 passes 8-1. We now have second reading on a series of ordinances, beginning with temporary ordinance 43-23.
An ordinance authorizing the execution of a master equipment lease purchase agreement and related equipment scheduled for the purpose of acquiring two Kubota LX26 tractors with loaders and a Kubota RTVX G850 utility vehicle and related appurtenances for the Lancaster Cemetery Department and declaring an emergency, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion the council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 43-23.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 43-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, this is allowing the LDOT to enter into, the city for LDOT to enter into a master equipment lease for the equipment mentioned in the ordinance.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass and gross and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 43-23.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 43-23. Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing additional.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 43-23 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 44-23.
An ordinance authorizing the execution of a master equipment lease purchase agreement and related equipment schedule for the purpose of acquiring a Dodge Ram 4500 cab and chassis, a Dodge Ram 2500 pickup truck, an 11-foot Galleon dump truck bed, a Penguin hydraulic system, a Falcon rotary knife mower head, and an Ace body utility truck bed, and related appurtenances for the Lancaster Department of Transportation and declare an emergency, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 44-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 44-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, when Mr. Deed spoke at, the LDOT superintendent spoke at a previous meeting, he advised that they were finishing up a previous 5-year loan for equipment, and it will be paid off. And we're acquiring new equipment with a new loan term that will not begin payment until 2025.
Thank you very much for the discussion. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion council pass and gross and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 44-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 44-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Nothing additional.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
I was shuffling paper, I apologize. Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 44-23 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 45-23.
An ordinance establishing a new chapter 377 of the Lancaster Codified Ordinance entitled Utility Vehicles, offered by Mrs. Kreitz and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mrs. Kreitz.
Yes, second of three readings.
Second reading then on temporary ordinance 45-23. Temporary ordinance 46-23.
An ordinance to amend the zoning map subject to passage of the annexation of Metro Development 8.9 plus minus acres in Greenfield Township and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. Ailes and seconded by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Ailes.
Second of three readings, please.
Second of three readings on temporary ordinance 46-23. Temporary ordinance 47-23.
An ordinance to amend Lancaster Codified Ordinance Part 1 Administrative Code, Title 9, Taxation, Chapter 183 Municipal Income Tax, effective January 1st, 2018, Section 183.013, Allocation of Funds of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Lancaster and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporary numbered 47-23.
Second?
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 47-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
I'll save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record ordinance temporary number 47-23.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 47-23. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. After some discussion with various members in the administration, I made the recommendation to increase the city capital improvement fund from its current 0.05 to 2.10. That will increase the capital improvement income for next year from approximately $715,000 to $1.4 million. I think it's a needed step forward to start building that capital improvement fund up.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 47-23 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 48-23.
An ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to contract with the Lancaster Fairfield County Amateur Radio Club for use of the City of Lancaster's radio towers and access to the supporting radio buildings next to the towers, offered by Mrs. Teener, seconded by Mr. Ehlers.
Second of three readings.
Mrs. Teener.
Second of three readings.
Second of three readings on temporary ordinance 48-23. We now have first reading on a series of ordinances, beginning with temporary ordinance 49-23.
An ordinance to repeal and replace Lancaster Codified Ordinance Part 1 Administrative Code, Title 3 Legislative, Chapter 111, Rules of Council, Section 111.06.1, Standing Committees of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Lancaster and to declare an emergency, offered by Mrs. Kreitz and seconded by Mr. Schoonover.
Mrs. Kreitz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 49-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary ordinance 49-23. Discussion, Mrs. Kreitz.
I'll save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mrs. Kreitz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 49-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 49-23. Mrs. Kreitz.
Yes, the reason we need to suspend, this will retitle the current IT, Telecom, and GIS Committee to the Administrative Services Committee, and also include the Human Resources function under that going forward. And the new name will be more representative of what that committee does. We need to suspend because this needs to be passed before the new council term.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? Yes, Ms. Tina?
Yes, I understand the need for that. The only problem I have with it is the way it reads to me is we discussed it in committee. At least that's my thing, we didn't. And so we always want to hold everybody else accountable, all the department heads and council should be the same in our committees. So I'll be voting no on it.
Thank you, Ms. Tina. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
No.
Temporary ordinance 49-23 passes 8-1. Temporary ordinance 50-23.
An ordinance to repeal and replace Lancaster Codified Ordinance Part 1, Administrative Code, Title 3, Legislative Chapter 111, Rules of Council, Section 111.06, President Pro Temp and Clerk of Council of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Lancaster and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Kreitz and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 50-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary ordinance 50-23. Discussion, Mrs. Kreitz?
I'll save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mrs. Kreitz?
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 50-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 50-23. Discussion, Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes, thank you. Currently, under the Administrative Code, council rules have to have their organizational meeting by January 5th. This will adjust that to January 7th going forward.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 50-23 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 51-23.
An ordinance to repeal Lancaster Codified Ordinance Part 1, Administrative Code, Title 3, Legislative Chapter 111, Rules of Council, Section 113, Clerk of Council of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Lancaster and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Kreitz and seconded by Mr. Schoonover.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of ordinance temporarily numbered 51-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary ordinance 51-23. Discussion, Mrs. Kreitz?
As mentioned during Finance Committee, this is to clean up some old language that's in the council rules specific to the section on the clerk and public notice, payment of those public notices. This will eliminate that and remove it.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mrs. Kreitz?
I forgot we were on the suspend one. Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 51-23.
Second. Motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 51-23. Mrs. Kreitz?
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 51-23 passes 9-0. And temporary ordinance 52-23.
An ordinance to repeal and replace permanent ordinance 25-23 passed on November 13th, 2023 to establish the compensation for the auditor for the term commencing payroll 1 of 2024 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 5223.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary ordinance 52-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President. I'm asking for suspension of this tonight so that it can be considered and passed prior to the end of the year. As you know, elected officials' salaries must be set prior to the beginning of the new term. So, and also, when looking at the salary, I recommended some adjustments based on the budget for increases in various other parts of the city, and I just felt it was appropriate to bring this legislation forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDaniel. Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
I'm having a little hard time hearing. I apologize. Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 5223.
Second.
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 52-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel?
Nothing additional.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 52-23 passes 9-0. Are there any further ordinances to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? If not, we'll move to tabled legislation, of which there is none. Is there any unfinished business this evening?
President Newell, if I
Mr.
might.
Porter.
I would just remind all incoming council members and current council members that the swearing in for new council members will be next Monday, the 18th, at Alley Park from 6 to 8. If you have not responded or RSVP'd to Teresa at this time, please make sure that you do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Porter. Any other unfinished business this evening? Is there any new business? All right, seeing none, we'll ask the clerk please read our announcement of scheduled meetings.
The next regular session of council is January 8th at 6:30 p.m. The meeting following is January 22nd, also here at 6 p.m. in council chambers. Upcoming special meetings is an organizational meeting scheduled for January 6th at 9 a.m. at the 1897 conference room. Upcoming committee meetings for the next 30 days. Finance Committee, January 22nd, 2022 at 6 p.m. here in council chambers.
Thank you very much. Are there any bills?
There are two. Spotlight Trophies and Awards, $251 for plaques and nameplates, and the City Hall tin plate. And then MNCO for publication of legislation, $333.54.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion we pay the bills.
Second.
A motion and a second to pay the bills. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Is there a need for an executive session? I believe we've already done it, so there is no need for the final time. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'd like to make that motion we adjourn.
Is there a second? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We all are adjourned. Thank you all very much. May you have a happy holidays and a Merry Christmas. You ready, Mr. Ailes?
Oh, dang it, on it. That was
One last time.